Jimmy Malone always had the last word, until he didn't. Jimmy Big Talk Malone had never met a conversation he couldn't dominate. If a friend told a funny story, he had a better one. If someone mentioned an accomplishment, he done it bigger, faster, and with more women watching. And if anyone dared correct him, well, they were just jealous of his charm. His friends tolerated him because it was easier than arguing. But deep down, Jimmy wanted more than just attention. He wanted admiration. He wanted to be loved, not just by women whom he assumed adored him, but by other men. He wanted their respect and their envy. He wanted them to wish they were him. Well, one humid summer night, Jimmy and his reluctant crew found themselves at the country carnival. The neon lights flickered like dying stars, the air thick with fried food and laughter. But Jimmy was louder than all of it. Psychics are full of crap, he declared, pointing at a small purple tent labeled Madame Vashka, Seer of Truths. Watch this, boys. I'll expose her as a fraud in 2 minutes flat. Before anybody could protest, he barged in. A hunched old woman sat behind a table draped in dark velvet. Candles flickered around her, casting eerie shadows on the tent wall. "Ah," she said, looking up at him with clouded, milky eyes. "A man whose mouth is bigger than his soul." Jimmy grinned. "That's cute, Grandma. You tell that to all the suckers?" Madame Vashka merely smiled. "Shall I read your fortune?" Jimmy scoffed. "Let me guess. I'm destined for greatness. The world will tremble before my irresistible charm." The psychic tilted her head. "You tremble before yourself more than anyone." That shut him up for half a second. Then he laughed, loud and obnoxious. "Lady, you're as fake as your wig." Madame Vashka did not react. She simply reached forward and ran a single bony finger over his lips. A shiver ran down his spine. "A man who drowns in his own lies deserves a fitting punishment," she whispered. Jimmy sneered. "Oh, yeah? And what is that supposed to mean?" She smiled. "You'll see." At first, Jimmy thought nothing of it. He strutted out of the tent, boasting about how he had left the old fraud speechless. His friends, uncomfortable, nodded along. But that night, something strange happened. As he lay in bed, scrolling through his phone, he noticed his lips felt thicker, swollen almost. He chalked it up to the cheap carnival food. The next day it got worse. His jaw ached. His lips stretched just slightly but noticeably. When he spoke, his voice sounded fuller, rounder. He ignored it. Then he told his first lie of the day. "Bro, you should have seen this chick at the gym. Practically begged me to spot her." As soon as the words left his mouth, he felt it. A sharp pull, like his skin was being tugged outward. His jaw cracked. His lips stretched just a little more. He touched his face. His mouth felt bigger. Panic flickered in his gut, but he laughed it off. Until it happened again and again. Every lie, every exaggeration, every moment he twisted the truth to make himself look better. His mouth grew. By the end of the week, it was impossible to ignore. His lips had swollen grotesquely, his jaw unnaturally wide. His friends recoiled when he spoke. "Dude," one of them muttered, eyes darting away, you should see a doctor." Jimmy doubled down. "What, you jealous? This is just a side effect of my new protein shake. Expand muscle mass even in the face." His mouth widened on the spot. His teeth grew larger, sharper. His gums stretched. His jaw cracked audibly. By the end of the month, Jimmy's mouth had overtaken half his face. His lips curled outward. His teeth no longer fit inside. He could barely eat. He could barely drink. Speaking was agony, but he couldn't stop. He had to talk. And every lie made it worse. His skin tore at the corners of his lips. His gums bled. His tongue swelled like a bloated corpse. His voice, once cocky and loud, became garbled, monstrous. One night, Jimmy stood in front of his mirror panting, his mouth now stretched from ear to ear. His cheeks had split open, revealing raw, glistening muscle. His teeth jutted out like ragged tombstones. He looked like a creature, not a man. But still, he couldn't stop. He tried to whisper to himself to prove he was still Jimmy. "I'm handsome," he muttered. His mouth stretched wider. "People still love me." His jaw snapped, unhinging like a snake's. They respect me." His lips tore open. His cheeks peeled back. His mouth grew so large it engulfed his entire head. And then, with a sickening, wet crunch, Jimmy Malone swallowed himself whole. No one saw him again after that night. His landlord found his apartment abandoned, the mirrors shattered, the walls streaked with claw marks. Rumors spread. Some said he ran away, too ashamed to face the world. Others swore they could still hear him in the wind, a muffled, desperate voice, struggling to speak, only to be devoured by his own endless hunger for words. And in a forgotten carnival tent, Madame Vashka sat quietly, smiling to herself. For she had seen the truth, and the truth had finally consumed Jimmy Malone. Well, thank you for joining me on my latest story, Jimmy Big Mouth. If you want to learn more about me, or you want to see my artwork or more stories, go to my website, tfhcalifornia.com.